Welcome. I'm Bertram Souza, veteran Mahoning Valley journalist and host of the Scribbler video podcast. Today, we turn our attention north of the border, where President Donald Trump's trade war is raging. Trump's strategy for forcing Canada to become America's 51st state is diabolical, to say the least. He aims to destroy Canada's economy by shutting off American markets for its goods and services. In so doing, the Republican president believes America's strongest ally will beg him to be its savior. Will Trump's strategy succeed? Will the new Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, along with those in the nation's broad political and ideological spectrum, have to eat their words that Canada will never give up its independence as a sovereign nation and become a part of the United States? To answer those questions and to discuss Trump's trade war against Canada, I've invited Caroline Pestier, a highly regarded economist who has been directly involved in the country's economic planning as vice chairman of the Economic Council of Canada. I've known Caroline for many years, given that she's the grandmother of my niece, Sunita de Souza, the daughter of my brother Herman and his partner, Catherine Pestier. Sunita is a student at the University of Toronto, Canada's leading public institution of higher learning. The university ranks in the top 10 globally. Sunita and a couple of her colleagues at the university may be joining me for the second segment of this podcast. It's good to see you again, Caroline. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for agreeing to participate in this podcast and to share your vast knowledge about the Canadian and global economies. Let's begin by having you tell the viewers about yourself. You have an interesting family history and an impressive professional and academic resume. So if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you, Bertram, for inviting me. And I hope I may be of some use. Yes, well, now, I immigrated to Canada from the UK 62 years ago. So I think I'm fully Canadian. I've been very lucky. I've had some very good jobs. Some of them are, yes, maybe more than half are sort of focused on economics. I was first with the private sector group, and then I was invited to join the Economic Council of Canada, which is similar to the Council of Economic Advisors in the States. And then after that, actually interesting, we were abolished because they didn't like our recommendations. So that organization has disappeared. Then I joined a Canadian government-funded organization that works with researchers in the global south, helping universities in Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia develop their own research capacity. Because one of the things that has interested me the most is how, in the social sciences, particularly economics, how research gets used or not used by policymakers.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've had a lovely career, and then I retired quite a long time ago, but I did keep up some of my international commitments. But I have a family with 4 children and 5 grandchildren, and now two great-grandchildren.
Wow. Well, I knew you, and I've known you, and of course, I knew your late husband. It was a pleasure meeting both of you and getting to know you when I visited Canada. So when we were arranging this, you and I chatted, and you brought up a lot of interesting points about what's going on with Donald Trump and his trade wars. So let's go straight to what I believe is the overarching point of contention in the current state of U.S.-Canada relations. In arguing that Canada should become America's 51st state, Donald Trump contends that without U.S. markets, Canada's economy would collapse and, Canada would actually go broke. Is he right?
I don't think he is, but I think that Canada has some vulnerabilities. So I thought that I could go through a few of these vulnerabilities
Please do.
and then perhaps talk a bit about strengths. So, I mean, to start with, you see, compared to the US, it's a much bigger country. It's the second biggest country in the world after Russia.
Right.
And that means we have 4,700 miles from east to west, and we only have about 41 million people. So if you can envisage that, it's often easier to buy and sell across the border than it is to go from one end of Canada to another. So that is a sort of geographical issue. There's also, of course, a climatic issue that it's difficult to get a lot of fruit and vegetables in Canada in the winter. But talking about the economy, Canada on paper, sort of at first sight, looks quite strong, and that's because we've had a very rapid increase in population. So our GDP has increased. But if you look behind that, actually our GDP per capita and our income per capita is the weakest of the G7. And now turning sort of to trade, now it's true, more than 70% of both our imports and our exports are with the United States. And this is particularly worrying at this time in the human history, where the supply chains are very, very closely linked. So to give you an example, I think 95% of the aluminum we produce is sold to the US, but all our beer cans are imported. Our aluminum beer cans are imported to the US. So you see that it's so very close. It's even closer when you get into the automobiles. It's a question of whether it's 9 or 8 times that to make and put together an automobile crosses the Canada-US border. So you see, you have the raw material, then you have the steel, then you get some aluminum, then you get some glass skin, then you get some engines, then you get some electronics, and so on and so forth, each time you go across the border. And so it is a very, very close relationship. Among in Canada, I think our 10 most successful exports, 8 of them are very closely linked to the US. Now that's the actual trade. Now when you get into investment, there's a sort of related element here in that people in companies, corporations, have frequently invested in Canada in order to get into the US market. And there's been a recent case, a particular case, that in 2021, it was, I think, a German company that applied to invest in Ontario to make batteries, automobile batteries. And they asked for a grant, and they didn't get it. So they decided that they would actually invest in the US. And now they already had one plant in Canada. They've now closed that Canadian plant because that's where, where they see sales. So that's a very worrying thing. Now, if you turn to something like defense, now 80 cents out of every dollar that Canada spends on defense is spent in the US. So we're talking about vulnerability. On the political side, we have 10 provinces, 3 territories, and they have sort of different interests. This, up to now, what has really shown up has been in terms of protecting the environment.
Right.
The Alberta and Saskatchewan, particularly Alberta, that produces oil and gas, they don't want to have very much to do with environmental protection. That's all very well, but then when we come to thinking about could we cut off oil and gas exports to the States?
Yeah.
Alberta says no. And so there's a a difference of opinion on the political level. Then I think finally, I'd sum this all up by saying that in terms of employment, I mean, out of a working population, I guess of about 25 million people, we think that we might lose 1.5 million jobs in the next year with this tariff.
Wow.
So yes, it's quite a vulnerable situation.
Given your long experience and long relationship with Canada's economy and also the global economy, and your service as vice chairman of the Economic Council of Canada, were you surprised by the actions or the aggressive nature of Donald Trump's attitude towards Canada?
Yes, I was. Although, I mean, at the beginning it was about ethanol, and that's ridiculous. There's very little ethanol, and the northern border. But when you get down to it, what he wants is to repatriate to the U.S. Manufacturing jobs.
Yes.
And he feels that he's lost most of them to Canada and to Mexico. So, and he also wants cash from tariffs so that he can cut taxes. So when you look at really what he's looking for, it's not that surprising. I mean, what's surprising is the way he does it. But it's not that surprising.
When he talks about, and he has said that he wants the United States to become a manufacturing powerhouse, and he wants to bring back all of the jobs that have been taken abroad, including Canada and Mexico, for especially auto manufacturing. He's already put on a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum. And so how easy would that be for him to accomplish those goals of, forcing American companies and perhaps even foreign companies to shut down their manufacturing facilities and move them to the United States?
I think, I mean, it obviously would be costly, but after about a 5-year period, they probably could do it. The question is whether it would really restore the kinds of jobs he's looking for. I mean, I think the people who vote for him, I may be wrong, but I think are people who think that they would want to get back to the situation in the 1980s and 1970s, 80s, where there were a lot of good jobs in manufacturing. People who had a job could keep it for life. They would get a pension, they could buy a house, and they could raise a family relatively easily without having to go to university or anything like that. Those kind of jobs are actually becoming scarcer because there's so much automation and there's so much IT in production now that you either have to be quite good at your in IT, and then soon we'll be talking about AI, artificial intelligence, that you can't really get that many skilled, permanent, well-paying jobs. So I think he may be a bit mistaken.
As to the number of jobs that could be created. And I know you're aware, because we've just talked about this, that the region I'm in, the Mahoning Valley, the Youngstown area, it was at one time a huge steel manufacturing center. And, like as you said, thousands of people were hired straight out of high school. You did not have to have a college degree. You got out of high school and you went straight to work there. Now, all of those mills shut down. And in fact, in 2017, after he was elected the first time, Donald Trump came to Youngstown and promised to reopen all of those mills along the river, and also to bring back all of the auto manufacturing jobs that had been lost because GM had a major assembly plant here as well. None of those things came about. Indeed, during the Obama administration, a French company, Vallourec, opened a steel making plant facility in our region, and it's so fully automated that the number of people hired pales in comparison to those who used to work in the old mills. And you're right. So that's, those are some of the things that I don't think Donald Trump's supporters understand, that automation is the new manufacturing process, right?
Yes, and in fact, of course, electronic vehicles need less machinery than previously.
Right. During your tenure as vice chairman of the Economic Council of Canada, a report was published assessing the Canada-US trade agreement. What were the main findings, and did the report address the ramifications of the agreement being cast aside?
Well, we at the council were strongly in favor of the free trade agreement with the United States. And we looked at, how different parts of Canada would be affected. And we realized that there would be people losing their jobs. But we calculated, and we actually, did some of the math about this, that the benefits, the increased income and increased tax revenue would allow policymakers to make a real strong effort to retool people, provide them with really proper training so that they could go to other jobs, and even if necessary, help them move from one province to another.
So in arguing for, or in sort of defending his trade war, not only with Canada, but with Mexico right now. And then on April the 2nd, he's going to do a global war where he's talking about reciprocity in tariffs and also, rules and regulations, etc. He argues that the United States has been treated unfairly and that it's gotten very little benefit from having trading partners around the globe. Could you speak to that as far as whether or not he is correct in that assessment?
Well, American consumers have had enormous benefits. I mean, the cost of consumer products, whether it's food, toiletries, clothes, sports equipment, has gone down dramatically. So consumers have benefited, and particularly low-income consumers. I think that's an important thing to say. They've benefited enormously. And the employment has stayed really pretty strong in the US, and people have made a lot of money in diversifying into either entertainment or various different sectors. So I think, when he talks about that Canada, for example, is ripping off the US.
Yes.
Well, he throws around this number of $200 billion.
Yes.
And several of us and several of the Canadian journalists have tried to say, what on earth does this mean? To start with, if he's looking at the trade balance, there is about 70 billion, but all the benefits that the US gets, if you take away oil and gas, there's actually a trade deficit. Canada has a trade deficit with the US because we have a deficit in services and we have a deficit in other goods other than oil and gas. So then we try to think, well, is he thinking about things like defense spending that
Right.
we don't, and that is true, that Canada doesn't live up to its NATO commitments. But even so, you're not going to get 200 billion very easily. There's another thing that is a problem, and that is the Canadian protection of dairy products.
Right.
What's called supply management. And that does prevent US goods coming into the country. And yeah, even so, I don't think you're going to get up to 200 billion. So we don't really know what he's thinking about there.
On the issue of dairy, when the Premier of Ontario talked about, providing electricity to the states, to 3 or 4 U.S. states, and sort of threatened to increase tariffs on those, and even talked about the possibility of cutting off electricity, Donald Trump came right back and talked about a 200% tariff on dairy products. And in making that argument, he said, and I'd like to get your response to this as a sort of a large economic discussion. He said that if American farmers, if he put on these tariffs, American farmers would do so well that they would be able to make huge profits merely by supplying American consumers with milk and other dairy products. The argument being, we can be self-sufficient and self-consuming, and we don't need markets around the world.
But, I mean, the fact is that Canada doesn't export dairy products to the States. Our dairy products are too expensive. Nobody wants them, except we keep the prices artificially high to protect local farmers.
Okay.
We do export a great deal of beef and canola, colza, sometimes called colza, other dairy agricultural products, but very, very little dairy, maybe a few specialty cheeses, but at the same price you get them from France, so it's not a big deal.
Okay. The new Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of Canada during the global financial crisis and of the Bank of England following Brexit, has described Trump's plan to annex Canada as, quote, unthinkable and disrespectful. He appears to be expressing the sentiments of a majority of the Canadians. Indeed, through his attack on Canada, Trump has done more to unify the country than any politician could do. How angry are the Canadian people with this threat of Donald Trump saying, if you don't do it my way, if you don't play ball with me, I'm going to make you suffer, and you're going to be forced to join to become the 51st state of America?
I think people are very angry. I mean, one of the things that on the political side, the Liberal Party of Canada was almost certain to lose the next election.
Right.
Now there's a good chance that they'll win, purely because of Trump.
I watched the election of Mr. Carney, and I also watched his swearing in and the speech he gave. And it was a very powerful speech, and sort of stood up to this, what a lot of people believe to be a bully, and sort of made it very clear that, becoming the 51st state of the United States is off the table. And indeed, the Prime Minister broke with tradition by visiting Europe rather than the United States for his first foreign trip. He's obviously looking to establish markets for Canadian products and services. Could trade partnerships with European countries and Britain make up for the losses of American markets?
It would be tough. I mean, to be honest, Canada has been, economically speaking, rather lazy in the last 30 years, that we've benefited enormously from the relationship with the US. And so we haven't diversified our economy sufficiently. And we have a very weak competition policy. So there are a number of steps which would need to be taken. In the first instance, and the very easy one, well, easy in a way, thanks to Trump, is to get rid of the barriers to trade between the provinces. Mm-hmm. Because it's a ridiculous situation. You can't sell alcohol between two provinces. And in Ottawa, we're in the middle of between two provinces.
Right.
And here you can't practice more seriously. You can't practice almost any profession in a different province. You have to have your credentials approved by the province that you're going to. So that's doctors, nurses, lawyers, accountants, almost anybody. And similarly with the building trades, there are regulations on the building equipment and stuff that differ from province to province. And for years, the economists have said, we have to get rid of these. And then the local governments have brought up reasons why not. Some of the poorer provinces in the Maritimes are afraid that if they could get everything from central Canada, nobody would buy their stuff. So that's the first thing to do, is to get rid of the interprovincial trade barriers. Now, the next thing would probably be to improve competition policy, because we don't have enough competition in between companies in Canada. I mean, Canadians focused on having big companies because we wanted to be like the Americans. And so in many industries, we've only got 2 or 3 companies. And we've only really got 2 airlines. I mean, look at how many airlines you have, and look at how the distances we have to cover.
Yes.
And so that really is a great weakness. There hasn't been enough investment in production development. Canada is fairly good at innovation. It's very weak at getting the innovation into the plant, into the factory. So much more attention needs to be done to that. Now, that all needs to be done sort of in the medium term, and then at the same time, but we need to diversify. And I mean, there are all kinds of opportunities. I'm looking at the seafood situation yesterday, and we sell most of our lobsters and seafood to the States, but there's an enormous market in Asia and in Europe. And that's the same for many other things that we could diversify into the EU, back into the UK, but really more I'm thinking of places like South Korea. There's really a growing economy, and they want North American products. I don't think they care if they're Canadian or they're American, if we could sell them a good price. So it's the price that we need to work on. So yes, we need to somehow disentangle some of these supply chains. Now, I don't want to be quoted on this, but I am speaking publicly. But there's what we call the nuclear option, which Australia adopted. And Australia really now it's a more vibrant economy than the Canadian economy, and they've decided to focus on their natural resources, and they've given up automobiles. What if we gave up automobiles and really went into clean energy? We could be an absolute leader in clean energy. I mean, Hydro-Quebec is one of the biggest producers of hydroelectricity and supplies much more than Ontario Hydro does. I mean, Ford stuck his neck out a bit. But if it had been Quebec, that would have been another story. And the softwood lumber can be sold all over the world. It doesn't have to be sold to the US. So there are quite a lot of opportunities, but they need work, and they need willpower.
What is the reason for the barriers that exist between the provinces? And is there a historical explanation for this where each province looks upon itself as an individual country, so to speak?
Well, certainly Quebec does.
Right.
But you have to remember that these were small populations. They drew up their own building trades. Some of the local inputs were different, or they thought they were different, and then they were a long way away from whether it was Winnipeg was a long way away from Montreal or Toronto. We'll have our own nursing code, we'll have qualify our own doctors. So it is historical. But as I say, for Newfoundland and Prince Edward Island, for example, I think a lot of their places would go broke if they didn't have these barriers. But I'm afraid that would be worth it.
Mm-hmm. So it almost appears that Canada needs a leader who will not only be willing to stand up to Donald Trump and his tactics, but also to try and actually create a cohesive nation called Canada, where the barriers are torn down and provinces all see themselves as belonging to one unit. Is Prime Minister Carney that person, in your opinion?
I think he has the potential. I mean, as I think I sort of hinted, I think that Trump actually, in the long run, may be doing us a favor.
Right. Yeah. So, and I know you're retired, but if your advice was sought by the government as to the first steps that need to be taken to, sort of react to or come up with a strategy to battle Donald Trump's war on Canada, what would your advice be?
Well, I think that, as I said, the first thing would be the non-tariff barriers between provinces. Then I think it would be useful to really bring to everyone's attention Canada's strengths, because there are people in some of the big cities and things. They have no idea of the importance of potash. They have no idea of the importance of some of the rare minerals.
Right.
The amount of nickel that we sell, the amount of, I don't know, some of the agricultural things as well. I mean, they don't really realize the strength that we do have. We also have another strength that I haven't mentioned, and that is that we do have a very strong social network. I mean, we have universal free health care, and we have very generous child benefits, family support programs, and so that with these, and again, I was listening to someone talking the other day about the importance of encouraging people to go into the trades and really think twice before going and taking a college degree in the social sciences, because you may go back. What's happening in some cases in Ontario is people take a general arts degree for 3 or 4 years, and then they go to a vocational college.
Right.
So, I mean, people have. The reason that I'm saying you do this is so that once people are all on the same understanding, well, then you can ask them to make sacrifices or decisions. We're going to invest massively there, but we're not going to invest there. Or we're going to really favor artificial intelligence over steel or something,
Right.
But you can't ask people to make big decisions or support big decisions if they don't know where they are.
Right. So finally, and I appreciate the time, if you were to look into your crystal ball, where are we headed in the relationship between the United States and Canada?
Gosh, it's really difficult to see because I mean, there's so much going on in Washington, um,
Right.
and we have, of course, a very large Ukrainian population here,
Mm-hmm.
and they are going to be very angry with Trump,
Yeah.
depending on how he cuts up Ukraine with Putin, and I think Canada is going to be angry with Trump for a long time. So I'm just hoping, in a way, that Trump is distracted by other things. He's got an awful lot going, that he sort of forgets about Canada for a bit.
Um, and finally, on the issue of immigration, now Trump has made it very clear that his immigration policies, first of all, he's going after illegal immigrants in this country, in the United States, but he's also, questioning legal immigrants, especially from certain countries that he despises or dismisses. He has talked about wanting immigrants from nice countries like Norway and Sweden. Obviously, predominantly white countries, because there is this idea of the great replacement theory that he
Yes,
and his supporters have embraced, that says in the not too distant future, whites will be a minority in the United States, and therefore there needs to be a way to increase the white population, either by getting rid of non-whites or by bringing in more whites, which is my explanation for why he wants to take over Canada, because you are a predominantly white country,
well,
and
yes,
he wants your white population. But on the issue of immigration, Canada was always known, and you have, and obviously I have a lot of family in Canada who came from other countries, who are living in Canada, have wonderful lives, and love being there. But it appears that attitudes towards immigration seem to be changing. And it's almost, there are people in Canada, there are Canadians who seem to be embracing Donald Trump's vision of immigration. Am I misreading that, or is there an issue sort of evolving here?
there is an issue, and it's actually a bit embarrassing for me, as my daughter works in the Department of Immigration.
Right.
The immigration, the government made a major mistake after COVID, or they said there didn't seem to be enough workers, so they said, we'll let anybody in. We'll all that small business have to do is say they can't find any workers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they can come in. There's what's called a temporary foreign worker
Right.
program, and then we have so many of our colleges are actually being financed by foreign students.
Right.
Okay, so the foreign students, once they're here, they can work in the summer, and not only can they work in the summer, but they can work after they've finished their studies. So you see, out of our population of 41 million, it's almost extraordinary. But in the last 2 years, we had 1.5 million of immigrants that we hadn't chosen, because Canada had quite a good immigration system,
Right.
in that, there was this family reunion and there was asylum seekers, but the main program were people who had to qualify according to a number of points, their education, their age, their language, and so on. And that gave us for many years a very good supply of people who wanted to work, who were young enough and well enough educated to work, and so on. Now that system has been entirely swamped by in the last really 3 or 4 years by the temporary foreign worker program, one of the results of which has been that there's a very severe housing issue right across Canada.
Yes. Yeah.
And people can't find housing, and interest rates were very high. Now they're low, but when they were high, there was no way they could pay for a mortgage. And so there was a backlash against immigration. And it's very, I mean, this is a new phenomenon in Canada. And I think that it's controlled now. I think and certainly hope that we've got the turning point and we're going to go back to the previous system where people realize that, I mean, Canada was built by immigration and up to, now it's been very, very successful.
Well, I appreciate the time. It's been really wonderful and very, very interesting. And
Yes,
obviously your knowledge comes through. I'm hoping we'll get a chance to chat again if this thing continues, especially after April the 2nd. Nobody knows what's going to happen.
yes.
And we'll be in touch.
Okay, right.
Okay, all the best.
Okay, thank you.